So, do media save lives? That's the bold question I'd like to pose in my talk today. The reason why I'm giving this talk is to raise an undercovered issue: suicide. The World Health Organization estimates that more than 800,000 individuals die due to suicide per year. This number is about 3 times higher than that of fatal traffic injuries in Western countries. Those left behind, bereaved family members, bereaved friends, and are often fundamentally affected by suicide. It is estimated that for each suicide, about 10 individuals require some sort of psychological assistance. So, it is fair to say that suicide is a huge burden, a huge public health problem, and one of the most crucial questions for prevention that comes up is, well, if so many are suffering from suicidal experiences in one way or another, why then is there still so little meaningful conversation on how to cope with suicidal thoughts and bereavement in the media? My name is Thomas Niederkrotenthaler. I'm an associate professor and lead for suicide prevention research at the Medical University of Vienna, and I'm also the current vice president of the International Association for Suicide Prevention. One of the reasons why there might be so little meaningful communication on suicide in the media is that with suicide, there is one major important difference to other health issues. Imagine a health campaign to decrease the risk of cardiovascular diseases. We all know these campaigns. They provide glossy images encouraging individuals to eat healthy, to exercise, to stop smoking. Now, what's the worst possible outcome of campaigns like this? Right, the worst case, and unfortunately it's frequently happening, is that they, although well intended, do nothing. They might not improve eating, not result in more people being physically active, or stop smoking. So, bottom line, the worst case is that these campaigns are ineffective in changing human behaviors. No effect. With suicide, the situation, unfortunately, is a bit different. It has been shown many times that inaccurate portrayal of suicide can trigger additional suicides, the Werther effect. Recent research shows that after the sensationalist reporting on a celebrity suicide, for example, suicide rates tend to go up by 13% in the 2 months afterwards. For example, what do those numbers mean in practice? In Germany, there are about 800 suicides per month. After the sensationalist reporting on a celebrity suicide, there would be about 200 additional suicides, 200 suicides more than expected. 200 people gone forever, 2,000 people bereaved to an extent that they require medical or psychological assistance. A tragedy and a huge burden to families, friends, and to society. So, the problem with communicating suicide in media is that, in the worst case, these portrayals can result in additional deaths. For example, many of you might know the Netflix series 13 Reasons Why. Season 1 features the suicide of 17-year-old Hannah Baker. Hannah faces life problems many adolescents have to deal with. There's substance use and misuse, there's sexual violence, there's bullying, there's relationship problems and breakups. Hannah tries to get help, but the series portrays Hannah's help seeking as futile, even counterproductive. Instead, it portrays suicide as the only option if individuals face such problems, and it provides overly simplistic explanations for Hannah's suicide. A very risky message to vulnerable adolescents. And indeed, very unfortunately, we have found that the series was linked to an increase of suicide of 22% in US girls and 12% in boys after its release in 2017. In total, about 94 additional suicides. So, put briefly, the issue is there is an obvious need to speak about the problem of suicide to reduce stigma. Media are an essential tool to do that, but if the portrayals focus on suicidal acts, they might trigger additional suicides instead of preventing them. So how can we speak about suicidality safely in the media? How can we promote stories that truly help others who might struggle with suicidal thoughts? Stories which might help delivering crisis intervention, which help putting life problems and how to cope with them into a broader perspective. Because suicide is never the only solution to a life problem, and there is research clearly indicating that suicides can be prevented. For many years, research has had no specific answer to this crucial problem. But this has changed. In the past 10 years, research about the so-called Papageno effect has emerged, which shows that if media portray individuals who have coped with adversity, who have been in dark places, including having suicidal thoughts or making an attempt or losing someone to suicide, but who have ultimately coped with their adversities, these stories can have a powerful protective effect on others. Research specifically shows that these stories reduce suicidal thoughts, and it appears that they increase help seeking and reduce suicides. The most current example of this comes from entertainment media, particularly the song of US hip-hop artist Logic, shown here. The song's name is 1-800-273-8255. That's the number of the United States National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, a service people can call if they are in crisis, and the song was released in 2017. It became immediately very popular. Logic performed the song with 50+ suicide attempt and suicide loss survivors at the MTV Music Awards in 2017 and again at the Grammy Awards in 2018. The song was in the top 3 of the US 100 charts for several weeks, and the video features a young black gay man who is bullied for his sexual orientation and considers suicide, but then ultimately he grabs the phone and calls the lifeline. The rest of the video shows him improving, getting back into life, and in fact doing quite well. Now, from a suicide prevention standpoint, this story is very unique in 2 regards. First, it is delivered as a song. Typically, prevention messages focus on serious experts speaking about problems, looking into the evidence. Now, as important as those aspects are, the bad thing with this approach is that, people are not typically paying lots of attention to health experts. And of course, it is not easy to identify with the message delivered by an expert. Quite different, the delivery as a song is just the opposite. Many listeners identified with the song and enjoyed it. It reached a huge number of people, particularly in the United States, where rap music is the most favorable music genre. And it reached individuals who would typically not listen to a prevention story promoting a mental health service. The second unique thing about the song was that it featured an individual coping with his suicidal thoughts. Very different from stories showing the despair of suicide death, this was a classic story of hope and recovery. It certainly showed the dark place the man was in during the worst time of his crisis, so it did not condone the problem of suicide or mental health problems. But, and that is the essential difference to portrayals like 13 Reasons Why, in the end, that person did something other than making a suicide attempt or dying by suicide. In fact, he reached out for help and then manages to cope. Very difficult, but also very hopeful. And I should say that what this young man does, what's happening to this fictional man, is quite frequently happening also here in the real world. We know from research that many people do have suicidal thoughts. If you ask me how many do have suicidal thoughts, My first answer would be, well, everyone -1 at one point of their lives. -1 because you do not need to identify with what I say. But in the end, most of people cope with their suicidal thoughts, and they cope with them in various ways. By getting support in terms of crisis intervention, for example, getting therapy, or by speaking with others in their close social environment. Suicidal thoughts are very common and they often occur in crisis situations. In fact, they can happen to any one of us here, depending on our personal capacity, our specific life situation, and also our social environment. But these crises are often coped with successfully, particularly if people get professional help, which is available. And this is exactly what this young man in Logic's video does. He gets help and manages to cope. So this media story for the first time reached a similar sized audience like suicide stories about suicide death frequently get. In fact, you could say the media are typically full of stories about suicide death, about the tragedy of suicide, but the portrayal of coping is really rare. And this is very unfortunate because in real life, coping with suicide is just as real as suicide is. And in each and every community, there are stories of coping with adversity. In each family, there are related experiences. But these stories are often untold in the media. And Logic Songs is a very rare exception. When me and my research team learned about this song, we became immediately interested in how it might have impacted help seeking and suicides. Technically, if many people see and listen to this song, there should be more people reaching out for help and potentially fewer suicides. So we collected the data, we did the analysis, and our findings were indeed very encouraging from a suicide prevention standpoint. During the months of high public attention to the song, there was a tremendous increase in calls to the lifeline. Nearly 10,000 additional calls, an increase of more than 6.9% above the number that would have been expected. And during the same time, 5.5% fewer suicides. This means that about 245 lives might have been saved. Saved by a song carrying a strong message of hope and recovery. We call this the Papageno effect, and there is now plenty of evidence, also from randomized controlled trials, to support it. So this is it. Can media help save lives? I suppose we can now surely say that they can do a great deal in helping to save lives. If they feature a suicide, they can help prevent harmful effects, the Werther effect, by not focusing on suicide methods and not providing overly simplistic explanations for a suicide or repeating the same suicide story unnecessarily. And most importantly, if media bring up stories of hope and recovery, that can truly help others to cope with their own adversity and suicidality, the Papageno effect. If people can identify with such stories, hope does seem to be contagious indeed. In addition, everyone can contribute to suicide prevention. Asking others who might be in a crisis or might be suicidal, how are you doing? Have you thought about suicide? Is a great start to start a conversation that might make a huge difference. And always reach out for professional help if needed. If you seek information or help, please check out, for example, jasp.info, the website of the International Association for Suicide Prevention. Thank you.